Number 10. Volney Curly Davis. Davis was born in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and was seemingly raised to be a bad boy. At the age of just 17, Davis was arrested for the first time in 1919 for stealing a pair of shoes. The grand larcenist was an early member of the Minnesota-based Central Park gang during the 20s, where he met the Barker gang and committed his first major robbery when he and an associate burglarized St. John's Hospital in Brooklyn Park. I'm not sure of the practicality of robbing a hospital instead of a bank, but to each their own, I guess. The night watchman of the hospital was executed during the robbery, and Davis was sentenced to life imprisonment for the execution. Curly escaped prison at McAllister during a mass escape and was recaptured, then escaped again before being sent to Alcatraz. Number 9. Al Scarface Al Capone. Alphonse Gabriel Capone, sometimes known by the nickname Scarface, was an American gangster and businessman who attained notoriety during the Prohibition era as the co-founder and boss of the Chicago Outfit. The Chicago Outfit was an Italian-American organized crime syndicate based in Chicago, Illinois. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, despite being at his Florida home at the time of the tragedy. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Moran, head of the Northside Gang, and the motivation for the plan may have been the fact that some expensive beverage, illegally imported from Canada via the Detroit River, had been hijacked while it was being transported to Cook County, Illinois. On March 27, 1929, Capone was arrested by FBI agents as he left a Chicago courtroom after testifying to a grand jury that was investigating violations of federal prohibition laws. He was charged with contempt of court for feigning illness to avoid an earlier appearance. Number 8. James Whitey Bulger. James Joseph Bulger Jr. was an American organized crime boss who led the Winter Hill Gang in the Winter Hill neighborhood of Somerville, Massachusetts, a city directly northwest of Boston. In 1956, Bulger served his first term in federal prison at Atlanta Penitentiary for armed robbery and truck hijack. In 1959, Bulger was briefly transferred to maximum security at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in California. Later in his sentence, he was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary and, in 1963, to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. On December 23, 1994, Bulger fled the Boston area and went into hiding after his former FBI handler, John Connolly, tipped him off about a pending RICO indictment against him. Bulger remained at large for 16 years. After his 2011 arrest, federal prosecutors tried Bulger for 19 executions based on grand jury testimony from Kevin Weeks and other former criminal associates. Number 7. Arthur Doc Barker. Arthur R. Barker was an American criminal and member of the Barker Karpus gang founded by his brother Fred Barker and Alvin Karpus. Arthur Barker was known as the hitman of the gang. His brother and Karpus would plan the attacks, and all Arthur did was execute them. He was arrested and convicted of kidnapping in 1936 and was executed while trying to escape Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. Barker is described by one writer as a dimwit and a drunk who was not much more than a brutal thug. However, fellow Alcatraz inmate Henry Young said of him that he was determined and ruthless, and that once he started on anything, nothing can stop him but passing. Number 6. Basil the Owl Banghart. Basil Hugh Banghart Jr. was an American criminal, burglar, and prison escape artist. Although a successful stick-up artist during the 1920s and early 1930s, he is best remembered for his involvement in the hoax kidnapping of Chicago mobster Jake the Barber Factor, a crime for which Roger Toohey and he were eventually proven innocent after nearly 20 years in prison. After years of unsuccessful appeals, Banghart and Toohey escaped Joliet with Edward Durlack, Martlick Nelson, William Stewart, St. Clair McInerney, and James O'Connor on October 9, 1942. The convicts were given even longer jail sentences for their escape, and on January 2, 1943, Banghart was returned to Stateville, where he was placed in solitary confinement. He was then transferred with an escort of 18 federal marshals to Alcatraz. Number 5. Harvey Bailey, aka the Dean of American Bank Robbers. Born in West Virginia, Bailey robbed his first bank around the time of 1921, and his last in Kingfisher, Oklahoma on September 9, 1933. He was incarcerated in Dallas on July 8, 1932, until he escaped on June 1, 1933, during a breakout in which the warden was kidnapped and used as a human shield. He was recaptured and found guilty of complicity in the Urschel kidnapping and was sentenced to life in prison on October 7, 1933. Originally sent to Leavenworth, he was transferred to Alcatraz on September 1, 1934. He was returned to Leavenworth in 1946 and transferred in 1960 to Seagoville Federal Correctional Institution in Texas, where he remained until he was released on March 30, 1964. While active, Harvey Bailey was one of the most successful bank robbers during the 20s and collected over $1 million in stolen funds. Number 4. Theodore Ted Cole. On December 16, 1937, a dense fog swept through the San Francisco Bay, impeding marine traffic and reducing visibility to near zero on Alcatraz Island. Cole and Rowe, both convicted bank robbers in Oklahoma, had been caught during earlier independent escape attempts from that state's McAllister prison. As escape risks, they were both incarcerated in high-security Leavenworth prison, then transferred to higher security Alcatraz in 1936. They were given jobs working in the prison's mash shop, a facility at the northernmost point of the island. Cole and Rowe were working in the mash shop. A routine head count at 1 p.m. showed all prisoners accounted for. At the next count at 1:30 p.m., the two men were gone. 2 iron bars and 3 heavy glass panes of a window in the shop had a hole 22 centimeters high and 46 centimeters long. Once through the window, they slipped down to the gate of a high wire fence, concealed by the fog. With a wrench taken from the tire shop, they forced the gate lock and dropped 20 feet to a beach. Their trail vanished at that point. Number 3. Meyer Mickey Cohen. During Prohibition, Cohen moved to Chicago and became involved in organized crime, working as an enforcer for the Chicago outfit, where he briefly met Al Capone. During this period, Cohen was arrested for his role in the executions of several gangsters in a card game. In 1939, Cohen arrived in Los Angeles to work under Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. During their association, Cohen helped set up the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and ran its sportsbook operation. In 1957, Time magazine wrote a brief article about Cohen's meeting with evangelist Billy Graham. Cohen said, "I am very high on the Christian way of life. Billy came up and before we had food, he said, 'What do you call it? That thing they say before food? Grace? Yeah, grace.' Then we talked a lot about Christianity and stuff." Allegedly, when Cohen did not change his lifestyle, he was confronted by Christian acquaintances. His response was this: "Christian football players, Christian cowboys, Christian politicians, why not a Christian gangster?" Cohen was convicted of tax evasion and sent to Alcatraz. Number 2. James C. Lucas, aka Texas bank robber. Lucas was originally sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for robbing First National Bank in Albany, Texas, in violation of the Dyer Act, interstate trafficking of stolen vehicles. He arrived in Alcatraz in January 1935 from the Texas State Prison and was known there as James Texas Bank Robber Lucas. James Lucas, along with 2 other inmates, were involved in an escape attempt in the spring of 1938. They enacted their escape plan on May 23, 1938 in the prison's mash shop, where they assaulted custodial officer Royal Klein with hammer blows to his head. They proceeded to the roof, where armed guard Harold Stites shot both Franklin and Limerick, although Lucas wasn't shot. Other guards arrived at the scene. Franklin, Limerick, and Lucas were cornered and surrendered to the guards. Number 1. George Kelly Barnes, aka Machine Gun Kelly. Barnes, better known by his pseudonym Machine Gun Kelly, was an American gangster from Memphis, Tennessee, active during the Prohibition era. His nickname came from his favorite weapon, a Thompson submachine gun. He is best known for the kidnapping of oil tycoon and businessman Charles F. Urschel in July 1933, from which he and his gang collected a $200,000 ransom. Urschel had collected and left considerable evidence that assisted the subsequent FBI investigation, which eventually led to Kelly's arrest in Memphis, Tennessee on September 26, 1933. His crimes also included bootlegging and armed robbery. The kidnapping of Urschel and the 2 trials that resulted were historic in several ways. They were the first federal criminal trials in the United States in which film cameras were allowed, the first kidnapping trials after the passing of the Lindbergh Law, which made kidnapping a federal crime, the first major case solved by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and the first prosecution in which defendants were transported by airplane. Machine Gun Kelly spent his remaining 21 years in prison. At number 10, Cho Yong-gon. Cho Yong-gon was one of the vice premiers of North Korea and deputy minister of construction and building material industries. He appears to have disappeared from public life after December 2014. In August 2015, South Korea's Yonhap news agency reported that, according to a source who demanded anonymity, he is believed to have been executed in May 2015 after opposing the policies of North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un on forestry. He was 63 at the time of his passing. Not much information is known about Yong-gon, all of it seemingly destroyed or hidden by North Korean government. At number 9, Young Song-taik. On the 12th of December 2013, Young was tried by a special secret military tribunal of the Ministry of State Security and executed by firing squad, according to state media. Chinese media and North Korea experts suggested that Young Song-taik's fall reflected a rejection of his efforts to prioritize economic development, and a victory for North Korean advocates of a military-first policy. Chung Young-suk, senior researcher at the Institute for Peace and Unification Studies at Seoul National University, said Young was the the only one in the North who could talk about economic change. So when I heard of Mr. Young's execution, my first thought was that it was a demise notice for those of us who had hoped for economic reform in the North. Number 8. Kim Chol. Kim Chol worked as a vice minister in the North Korean army. He was allegedly purged and executed in spectacular fashion for drinking and carousing during the period of mourning for Kim Jong-il. South Korean media reported that he was exploded by mortar bombardment and not shot by firing squad. However, Foreign Policy observed the claims probably originated from gossip and noted that stories about violent passings of North Korean elites tend to be exaggerated. Kim was one of 14 senior party, military, and government officials who were purged during Kim Jong-un's consolidation of power. Although he was held in prison, the execution was likely committed outside to avoid, well, destroying the prison. Number 7. Moon Kyung-jin. Moon Kyung-jin is a possibly deceased North Korean violinist who was formerly the head of Unhasu Orchestra. He was reported to have been executed in August 2013 along with others. Moon has received numerous awards and recognitions from the North Korean government during his career. In 2005, Moon won a competition held in Hungary. He performed with the Unhasu Orchestra at the Celle Pleyel Concert Hall in Paris on March 14, 2012. At the time, Moon told Associated Press, "Despite differing languages, we hope that we can easily understand each other through music and become friends," in an interview conducted shortly before the Parisian performance. According to a report, other arrested musicians were arrested as political dissidents or accused of possessing Bibles. The report also said that Moon Kyung-jin was executed by firing squad on August 20th, 2013. Number 6. Ri Young-ho. On the 16th of July 2012, North Korean state media reported Ri Young-ho had been relieved of all of his party duties, namely his Presidium Committee membership, Politburo membership, and Party Central Military Commission vice chairmanship, stating this move was due to unspecified illness. A spokesman for the South Korean Ministry of Unification said the move was very unusual. The meeting at which his removal was announced was attended by the entire Presidium, Politburo members, and candidate members, making ill health seem implausibly minor. Ri was replaced by Hyun Yong-chol in the role of the Chief of the General Staff. On the 20th of July 2012, unconfirmed reports from North Korea alleged that Ri had passed or been injured in a firefight with political bureau troops. In November 2012, the South Korean media reported that Ri was believed to be under house arrest. A 2015 report stated that Ri Young-ho had been executed in 2012. A lot of differing reports. At number 5, Park Ju-hong. Park was an official of the Central Committee of the Workers' Party of Korea. According to South Korean media, he had held the post of Deputy Director of the North Korean Workers' Party Administration Department. Park was involved with the Ministry of People Security. Consequently, he made multiple appearances at leader Kim Jong-un's on-site visits. Park was among the closest associates of Yang Song-taek. For instance, he accompanied Yang on a field guidance tour led by Kim Jong-un. They inspected Okryo Children's Hospital. According to a report distributed to overseas diplomatic missions of North Korea, the 16 closest associates of Yang were executed. The list included Park Jong-hong's name. The report stated that he was executed for showing disloyalty to first chairman of the National Defense Commission, Kim Jong-un. However, the report had not been independently verified. Park was reported to have been purged at the time of Ryong Chong-song's purge, as both were censored from articles available at the Uri Minzokiri website. At number 4, Park Nam-gi. In March 2010, it was reported by news agencies including Yonhap, Bloomberg, and The Guardian that Park had been tried and then executed by firing squad in Pyongyang for the offense of being a son of a bourgeois conspiring to affiliate the ranks of revolutionaries to destroy the national economy. According to The Guardian, he had been denounced as a traitor during a meeting in January 2010 and arrested on the spot. This related to the devaluation of the North Korean won in November 2009, which led to a crisis after rendering many people's savings valueless. Although John Park, a Stanton Jr. faculty fellow at MIT, claimed in 2012 that Park Nam-gi is still alive and had resurfaced after his alleged execution, Ri Jae-gong, the former first deputy head of the WPK Organization and Guidance Department, says Park Nam-gi was executed by firing squad in the course of a reactionary purge in 2010. Many inmates and political prisoners in North Korea are denounced as traitors to justify the executions of them. At number 3, Woo In-hee. Woo In-hee started an affair with Kim Jong-il. It is not known for certain when they began their courtship, other than it took place sometime in the late 1970s. While being treated for carbon monoxide poisoning, which led to the passing of a man in his car, Woo accidentally mentioned her relationship with the supreme leader. Kim Jong-il had Woo executed for talking about their secret relationship. In 1981, Woo was told she was free to go, but she was instead taken to the Kangkon Military Academy shooting grounds, just north of Pyongyang. She was tied to a post and shot in front of 6,000 people. 12 gunmen each fired 10 rounds from their AK-47s, mutilating her body beyond recognition. Woo's husband, Yoo Ho-sun, was forced to watch the execution. At number 2, Cho Man-sik. On the 5th of January, Cho was arrested by Soviet soldiers and detained in Pyongyang's Koryo Hotel. For some time, he was kept under comfortable conditions at the Koryo Hotel, from which position he continued to vocally oppose the communists. The Soviet civil administration discredited Cho by spreading rumors that he had collaborated with Japan. He stood in the 1948 vice presidency election, but by then the communist influence in the country's affairs was too strong, and he was unsuccessful, receiving only 10 votes from the National Assembly. Cho was later transferred to a prison in Pyongyang, where confirmed reports of him end. In June 1950, days before the North Korean invasion of South Korea, the northern and southern governments reached a tentative agreement to exchange Cho and his son for jailed South Korean Workers' Party leaders Kim Sam-young and Yoo Joo-ha. However, by June 24th, the two sides could not agree on a modality of exchange. After the start of the conflict the next day, Kim and Yoo were executed at Namsan in Seoul. Cho is generally believed to have been executed along with the political prisoners during the early days of the Korean conflict, possibly in October 1950. At number 1, Park Hong-young. According to secret documents of the former Soviet Union released in succession until 2002, Kim Il-sung and Park Hoon-young always acted together until the delayed plans of the conflict were finally decided. Kim Il-sung and Park Hoon-young were also on hand during their visit to Moscow from the 30th of March to the 25th of April 1950, when they were approved for conflict by Stalin. During the visit, Kim Il-sung and Park Hoon-young met Stalin and got written instructions of detailed conflict plans. Park Hoon-young was arrested on the 3rd of August 1953 in a purge of the former members of the Workers' Party of Korea by Kim Il-sung. On the 15th of December 1955, he was sentenced to execution for espionage. The date of Park's execution is uncertain, though sources suggest that he was executed that same month. At number 10, David Carpenter. Carpenter's first attempted execution occurred in 1960, for which he spent 7 years in prison. This was committed against Lois Rinna, the mother of future television personality Lisa Rinna. He was arrested for kidnapping in 1970 and spent another 7 years behind bars. After his release, Carpenter became a suspect in the Zodiac executions, although he was eventually cleared. From 1979 to 1981, Carpenter executed 5 women in Santa Cruz County and Marin County. On May 10th, 1988, a San Diego jury convicted him on 5 counts of first-degree execution in the passings of Richard Stowers, Cynthia Moreland, Shauna May, Diane O'Connell, and Ann Alderson. Carpenter was sentenced to pass away in the gas chamber and remains on deceased row in San Quentin State Prison. Number 9, Richard Boyer. Boyer, from La Mirada, California, was at his home abusing substances as well as abusing beverages while watching the 1981 movie Halloween 2. The opening executions in the film were used by him to be blamed, logically dismissed in reality in court, as a motive. On December 7, 1982, Boyer stabbed to passing an elderly couple in Fullerton, California. He stabbed the husband 24 times and the wife 19 times. He was arrested following a tip-off from the victim's son. He was about to be released by the police when he admitted to the crime. During the trial, Boyer was revealed to be a substance addict. He had consumed both beverages and substances on the day of the execution. He stated that he had driven to the victim's house to borrow money. At the property, he stated he started freaking out and could not remember committing the crime. The first trial ended in a hung jury. In the second trial, in 1984, a defense psychopharmacologist testified that Boyer had suffered a substance-induced flashback to a horror film, Halloween 2, which features a scene with an elderly couple. The film was shown to the jury, the first time in US legal history that a commercial motion picture had ever been submitted as evidence at an execution trial. The jury found him guilty and the judge sentenced Boyer to execution. Number 8, Luis Bracamontes. Luis Enrique Monroy Bracamontes is a Mexican convicted executioner who removed 2 police officers in Northern California. On October 24, 2014, Bracamontes opened fire on 3 Northern California sheriff's deputies, taking the lives of 2 and wounding the 3rd, while a civilian was also wounded in the shooting. Bracamontes is a citizen of Mexico and a convicted substance seller who was in the United States illegally. Bracamontes was sentenced to execution in 2018. Bracamontes' case earned attention during the 2018 midterm elections when the Trump administration ran an ad blaming Democrats for the executions by Bracamontes. Cable channels such as Fox News, CNN, and NBC stopped airing the ad, and Facebook banned it from its platform. Number 7, Vincent brothers. No, not like two siblings, his last name is Brothers. Vincent Edward Brothers is an American mass executioner convicted of ending the life of his wife, their 3 children, and his mother-in-law. Brothers was the former vice principal of John C. Fremont Elementary School in Bakersfield, California, and holds a master's degree in education from California State University, Bakersfield, and a bachelor's degree from Norfolk State University. Brothers, who had months earlier married his wife for the second time, was convicted of ending her and his mother-in-law on July 6, 2003. He attempted to create an alibi by flying to Columbus, Ohio under the pretext of visiting his brother. He drove his rental car to Bakersfield, removed his family members, and returned to Ohio. Forensic analysis of the rental car showed insects native to states west of the Rocky Mountains and odometer readings that supported the round trip to California. Brothers was convicted of first-degree executions with special circumstances of multiple slaughter and was ultimately sentenced to execution. At number 6, Kevin Cooper. Kevin Cooper is an African-American man currently on Demise Row at San Quentin Prison. Cooper was found guilty of 4 slaughters in the Chino Hills area of California in 1983. However, he has steadfastly maintained his innocence. Cooper's conviction and execution sentence has been highly controversial, garnering repeated attention from both Nicholas Kristof in the New York Times and Aaron Moriarty on the CBS program 48 Hours. There have been accusations that Cooper received an inadequate defense, as well as prosecutorial misconduct such as destruction of evidence, withholding exculpatory evidence from the defense, planting of evidence, brainwashing to witnesses, and perjured testimony from the sheriff's department. Number 5, Dean Carter. Dean Philip Carter is a convicted spree executioner, currently housed on San Quentin, California's Demise Row. He has been convicted of the execution of 4 women: Susan Knoll, Gillette Mills, Bonnie Guthrie, and Jeanette Collins. He was also implicated in the attack of Tok Chung Kim. On March 25, 1984, Carter took advantage of a woman who survived his attack. This guy is truly the scum of the earth. Hopefully his comeuppance comes sooner rather than later. At number 4, Richard Farley. Richard Wade Farley is an American convicted mass executioner. A former employee of ESL Incorporated in Sunnyvale, California, he stalked his coworker Laura Black for 4 years, beginning in 1984. Black obtained a temporary restraining order against him on February 2, 1988, with a court date set for February 17, 1988 to make the order permanent. On February 16, 1988, Richard Farley shot and removed 7 people at ESL and wounded 4 others, including Laura Black. He was convicted of 7 counts of first-degree execution and is currently on Demise Row at San Quentin. Number 3, Wayne Adam Ford. Ford was born in Petaluma, California, the second son of an American father and a German immigrant mother. His parents divorced when he was 10. He dropped out of high school and enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he served 6 years before being honorably discharged in 1985. He had a series of scrapes with the law, including allegations of beating and robbing an intimate worker in 1986 in Garden Grove, California. In 1990, he was arrested for animal cruelty, for which he served a brief jail sentence in San Clemente, California. Ford executed 3 intimate workers and a hitchhiker from 1997 to 1998. He strangled them during intimacy, then cut off their body parts. He turned himself in with a body part in a bag in his coat pocket. Number 2, Gunnar Lindberg. Gunnar J. Lindberg is an American convicted executioner on Demise Row in California. Lindberg was convicted of the 1996 execution of 24-year-old Vietnamese American Tien Minh Le in Tustin, California. Lindberg wanted to celebrate that evening's Super Bowl victory by the Dallas Cowboys by finding, and I quote, a Jap. Lindberg and an accomplice 17-year-old Dominique Michael Christopher encountered Lee, who was rollerblading around the tennis courts at Tustin High School. Lindberg and Christopher trapped Lee on the courts, beat him, kicked him, and then stabbed him many times. Prosecutors also charged Lindberg with a hate crime and bullying. On August 29, 2008, the California Supreme Court affirmed Lindberg's convictions and demise sentence. At number 1, Timothy Joseph McGee. A convicted serial executioner and Tunerville Rifa 13 gang member from the Atwater Village neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, he's alleged to be responsible for at least 12 executions between 1997 and 2001, 3 of which led to convictions. McGee is also suspected of at least 10 attempted executions, 4 of which led to convictions. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times named McGee one of the top 20 most notorious executioners in the history of California, a list that includes the likes of Charles Manson, the Golden State Butcher, and the Night Stalker. At number 10, a bone-chilling occult incident happened to a guard at this prison. Here's what he said happened. One night I was working in a different area, but I got a call on the radio. Flash, 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 offender in need of emergency medical care. That was the initiation of ICS and usually meant there was a problem. Usually a fight or a severe injury. Turns out this was an execution, and I swear this is something out of True Detective. There was an inmate face down in his bunk, tied up with bed sheets, deceased, with blood everywhere. The executed inmate was shirtless and had runes carved into his back. The other inmate was curled into a ball, muttering, "Demons, demons." It turns out the deceased inmate wasn't deceased, but really close to it. He was sent out on a 911 call and later passed away at the hospital. As for the executioner, no one could get a motive. One of the neighboring cellmates said he heard everything and described all the screams and the inmate saying the demons are coming. Ooh, chills down my spine. At number 9, Lauren Landavazo was walking with her friend Michaela Smith on September 2nd, 2016. The pair were walking home after school along a typically suburban footpath. At some point, the two girls were approached by a young man in a car. That young man was 20-year-old Cody Lott. Lott would later give two explanations for why he did what he did that day. He was jealous because Landavazo seemed to have a boyfriend, and the devil wanted him to do it. Regardless of which one is the truth, Lott opened fire on both girls with a .22 caliber rifle.
Shooting victim Michaela Smith's mom was also trying to figure out what was going on in that alley her daughter always walked down with her dear friend Lauren and other students. That's when she called Michaela.
Smith, who managed to survive the ambush, told police that Lott had made eye contact with her first before pulling the trigger. At his 2018 trial, Lott repeated that it was the devil that had helped him plan the shooting. The prosecution stuck with the idea that Lott was mentally unstable and angry over his inability to find a romantic partner.
Lauren looked directly at her killer in court and told him he may have taken her life, but he will never kill her spirit, as he says they will make it their life's work to ensure Lauren's legacy is always alive.
At number 8, the attempted execution of Peter Churm. According to his grieving family, 65-year-old Peter Churm was a beloved father and grandfather. Tommy Smith did not care about any of this. The only thing he cared about on February 24th, 2015 was getting the keys to Churm's Range Rover. When Churm stepped in to stop the young punk from stealing his vehicle, Smith, who had already been convicted of a staggering 57 offenses, pulled out a knife and stabbed Churm in the head, back, neck, chest, and arms. The stabbing attack was so frenzied that Smith actually snapped the 8-inch knife in two. Smith went on trial for attempted execution in March 2016. Smith told the Wolverhampton Crown Court that he was not responsible for his actions as he had been possessed by a demon on that terrible day. The court more than likely did not buy his possession story, but they did take into account that Smith had been previously diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. As such, he was cleared of the charge of attempted execution. Number 7, cheating with demons. Way back in 1974, 1 year after the release of the classic film The Exorcist, an exorcism was carried out in the sleepy town of Ossett, West Yorkshire, England. The possessed subject was one Michael Taylor, a 31-year-old married father of 5 children. Most who knew Taylor described him as a cheery fellow, although he was prone to fits of depression now and then. For the most part, these black moods were the result of a back injury that made it hard for Taylor to maintain steady employment. Things began to change in the Taylor household when they joined the Christian Fellowship Group, a local church organization. The previously irreligious Michael began regularly attending church services. One of the reasons for this dramatic change was 21-year-old Mary Robinson, the group's preacher. Robinson convinced her congregation that the power of God could drive out their demons. Outside of these meetings, some in Ossett began to claim that Robinson and Taylor were carrying on an affair. The more Taylor became involved with Robinson, the more his attitude began to change. The once chipper man became easily irritated and foul-tempered. Things came to a head when Taylor and Robinson were found naked together. Taylor blamed this on an evil presence within himself, and a local Anglican vicar was called in to perform an exorcism. During an all-night ceremony in October 1974, the vicar and other ministers apparently drove out 40 demons, including the demons of bestiality, incest, lewdness, and blasphemy. Number 6, the execution of Angie Escobar. On September 10th, 2015, a body was discovered inside of an abandoned car in the Whitestone section of Queens, New York. The body belonged to 28-year-old Angie Escobar, who had passed away after being stabbed some 80 times. The medical examiner in the case found that Angie had been terminated 4 days prior to her discovery. Before long, the NYPD zeroed in on a suspect, 31-year-old Louis Zambrano of Flushing, Queens. Zambrano was arrested on September 18th after fleeing to Virginia. Zambrano ultimately confessed to police that he had stabbed Escobar with a pair of scissors after the single mother admitted that she wanted to break off the relationship. In pleading guilty, Zambrano claimed that he had been possessed by a demon at the time of the termination. Zambrano also blamed trust issues for his actions. At number 5, Mama Butcher. The case of Elizbieta Plakowska involved multiple possessions. First of all, Plakowska believed that her son Justin and daughter Olivia were possessed by demons. At the same time, Plakowska was possessed by an entity that she called the Black Shadow. Of course, once Plakowska went on trial, her defense team turned her possession story into a plea of insanity.
Now, the defense was trying to prove that Plakowska was not guilty by reason of insanity when she stabbed her 7-year-old son Justin and a 5-year-old girl named Olivia, who she babysat in October 2012.
Dr. Philip Resnick took the stand and testified that the 45-year-old accused executioner had suffered a psychotic episode prior to carrying out the gruesome crime. As the trial continued, jurors learned the horrific truth that Elizbieta had stabbed her son 100 times and her daughter Olivia 50 times. The jury also learned that Elizbieta had originally told the police that an unknown stalker had carried out the executions after breaking into the family's Naperville home. At number 4, the first Brookline execution since its founding. Brookline, Connecticut is the type of town where deadly occurrences don't really happen. In fact, when 40-year-old Alan Bono was ended on February 16, 1981, it was Brookline's first termination since the town had been founded 193 years earlier. The guilty party had stabbed Bono more than 20 times with a common pocket knife. The perpetrator, 19-year-old Arn Cheyenne Johnson, went to trial proclaiming a most unusual defense, not guilty by reason of demonic possession. Without the demon possession story, this would have been an easy open and shut case. Johnson had stabbed his landlord Bono after a pair had gotten into a heated argument and was then arrested by police just 2 miles away from the crime scene. However, the roots of the case's weirdness began a year earlier on July 3rd, 1980. On that night, 11-year-old David Glatzel woke up screaming. He told his parents that he had seen a demon in his dreams, a demon with pointed ears, sharp teeth, and cloven hooves. David called his demon the Beast Man. The Glatzel family and Johnson decided to contact Connecticut-based demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren as part of their final attempts to rid David of the Beast Man forever. Johnson said at the trial that he had told the Beast Man to enter his body. Well, that sure did complicate things. At number 3, the Uber Demon. Dalton, 48, carried out one of the most inexplicable mass tragedies in the US. On February 20th, 2016, Dalton, an Uber driver, shot and ended Mary Lou Nye and her sister-in-law, Joe Nye, Dorothy Judy Brown, Barbara Hawthorne, and Richard Smith and his son Tyler. In between some of these drive-by shootings, Dalton continued to pick up passengers and drop them off at their destinations. During his interrogation, Dalton told detectives that the Uber mobile app began changing his personality. I know you guys are going to have a hard time believing this, but it literally took over my mind and body, Dalton told investigators. Dalton further elaborated that he saw the symbol of the Eastern Star inside the Uber app, and a horned devil head regularly appeared on his phone's screen whenever he logged on for work. In short, Dalton blamed his execution spree on the fact that he had been possessed by a demon hiding in the Uber app. Not very believable, in my opinion. Number 2, Russian cultists. In a forest outside of the city of Yaroslavl, 4 mutilated corpses were found. The bodies had been desecrated beyond belief. Plus, execution investigators also learned that the victims had been robbed either before or after passing away. Still, despite this fact, the sheer brutality of the crime led investigators to believe that robbery was not the motive. The investigators were right. The crime had been carried out by 6 self-proclaimed Satanists, led by a young man named Nikolai Ogolobyak. Prior to the executions, the gang of Satanists had carried out several animal sacrifices, but felt that humans had to be removed in order to please Lucifer. Therefore, Ogolobyak and his brood ended and dismembered the 4 teens as part of an initiation ritual, and according to some reports, also ate parts of their victims' bodies. Number 1. Dungeons and Demons. The execution of Vonda and Paul Bellofato was premeditated. Sean Sellers had stripped down to his underwear to avoid getting blood splatter on his clothes, and he tried to pose his victims in such a way as to make investigators think that an unknown intruder was responsible. Such planning hinted at an experienced exterminator, which is what Sean was. A year earlier, Sean had shot and ended a Circle K convenience store clerk named Robert Paul Bower, after the clerk had refused to sell him beer. Sellers never hid the fact that he was responsible for all 3 terminations. Convicted and sentenced to execution, Sellers remains the youngest criminal ever sentenced to execution in America since 1976. While languishing in prison, Sellers found fame as a born-again Christian and a crusader against the occult. At his trial and afterwards, Sellers maintained that he had embraced Satanism after becoming addicted to the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. Sellers, who also claims that he was at one time possessed by a demonic entity, became a fixture on television shows and conducted interviews with Geraldo Rivera and Oprah Winfrey. These interviews often saw Sellers speak as an expert on Satanism and occult practices. Number 10. Timothy Joseph McGee. A convicted serial executioner and Toonerville Reefa 13 gang member from the Atwater Village neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. He is alleged to be responsible for at least 12 executions between 1997 and 2001, 3 of which led to convictions. McGee is also suspected of at least 10 attempted executions, 4 of which led to convictions. In 2018, the Los Angeles Times named McGee one of the top 20 most notorious executioners in the history of California, a list that included the likes of Charles Manson, the Golden State Butcher, and the Night Stalker. This guy was definitely placed in a high security prison. They're mostly reserved for the worst of the worst, like multiple slaughterers and escapees. If this guy was on my cell block, I think I'd hide. Number 9. Larry Raines. On May 30th, 1964, Larry, posing as a hitchhiker, was given a lift by 30-year-old Gary Albert Smock, a Plymouth school teacher passing through Kalamazoo. During this trip, Raines brandished a weapon and forced Smock to leave the car and climb into the trunk, where he subsequently locked him in. While continuing the trip, Smock attempted to get out of the car, after which Raines stopped the car, tied him up, and then shot him twice in the back of the head. He then stole $3 and other items of material value before leaving the car on the side of the road, where it was discovered a few hours later by a police officer. Over the next few months, Raines told a number of acquaintances about the execution, due to which he was arrested in the early morning of June 5th, 1964, in front of his friend's house. He offered no resistance during his arrest and readily admitted to removing Smock with incriminating evidence, such as a watch and shoes, later identified as belonging to Smock by relatives and friends. When he was taken to the police station, Raines told police that he had executed 4 others during holdups at various gas stations. He confessed to the May 30th execution of 33-year-old Charles E. Snyder in Elkhart, Indiana, the execution of an Air Force serviceman in Paw Paw, Michigan, the execution of a man in Las Vegas, Nevada, and another man in Kentucky. Number 8, we have Bobby Bostic. Bobby Bostic and his friend saw a few people giving presents to the needy around Christmas time, handing out a Christmas tree and an old couch to those who needed it more. Bobby and his friend ran out of the house where they were at, weapons in hand after inhaling substances, and pointed the weapons at a woman taking the cushions from the couch out of her car. A man yelled at them, and so they turned their attention towards the man, who was the woman's boyfriend. After refusing to give money to the pair, Bobby fired at the man, which grazed him thankfully. He handed them his money and the two ran off to find another victim. They found a woman moving packages out of her car into her house when they put the weapon to her head and told her to give them her keys and get in the car. The pair drove off with the woman and robbed her of her possessions before dropping her off at some random alley. They were both arrested an hour later, and Bobby was sentenced to 241 years after denying several plea deals, which could have reduced his sentence by as much as 211 years. He said that as soon as he heard the judge tell him that he would pass in prison, the gravity of the situation suddenly hit him. Number 7, Alfred George Hines. Hines was an amazing escape artist. He escaped from Nottingham prison after sneaking through the locked doors and over a 20-foot prison wall, for which he became known in the press as Houdini Hines. He worked as a builder-decorator in Ireland and throughout Europe until his arrest by detectives of Scotland Yard in 1956, after 248 days as a fugitive. After his arrest, Hines brought a lawsuit against authorities, charging the prison commissioners with illegal arrest, and used the incident as a means to plan his next escape by having a padlock smuggled into him while he was at the law court. 2 guards escorted him to the toilet, but when they removed his handcuffs, Hines bundled the men into the cubicle and snapped the padlock onto screw eyes that his accomplices had earlier fixed to the door. He escaped into the crowd on Fleet Street, but was captured at an airport 5 hours later. Hines would make his third escape from Chelmsford Prison less than a year later. He then returned to Ireland, where he lived for 2 years as a used car salesman under the name William Herbert Bishop, before his arrest after being stopped in an unregistered car. Needless to say, they tightened up security around him after all that. Number 6, Antonio Ferreira. Ferreira, 35, who emigrated to France with his family in the 1980s, was in Fresnes prison in Val-de-Marne, having been jailed for bank robbery. He escaped when a gang set fire to cars in the local area to create a diversion, before raking the guard posts with automatic rifles and smashing down the door and interior walls with rocket launchers. They gave Ferreira explosives that allowed him to blow off the bars of his cell. He had previously arranged to commit a minor act of disobedience so as to be placed in a punishment wing, which was well located for his escape. It took 3 days of deliberations for the verdict to be announced at the Cour d'Assises de Paris after a 10-week trial. In total, 18 accomplices were sentenced, while 2 suspects were acquitted. Punishments ranged from suspended sentences to a variety of jail terms, including 4 of 15 years each. The men were convicted of crimes including aiding and abetting escape, destroying goods with explosives, burning cars, and transporting weapons. After the escape, security tightened up around them, often monitored almost 24 hours of the day. Number 5, Jason Barnum. The eyeball man, Jason Barnum, was sentenced to 22 years in prison for shooting an Alaska police officer. Barnum's offenses were driven by a serious substance addiction, reports The Independent. What made him seem even more dangerous and intimidating was his tattoo-filled visage. Barnum had one of his eyeballs completely tattooed. The shooting happened when police were investigating home burglaries and car thefts. Officers were inspecting a hotel in 2012 when Barnum opened fire from a bathroom. 2 officers shot back, striking Barnum in the arm, and 1 officer was injured. Barnum later admitted to committing thefts and burglaries to feed a substance addiction. Number 4, Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal who spent the last 42 years of his life in prison after being convicted of 4 separate executions while in prison for armed robbery, one of which was overturned. Silverstein spent the last 36 years of his life in solitary confinement for executing corrections officer Merle Klutz at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois. Prison authorities described him as a brutal executioner and a former leader of the Aryan Brotherhood prison gang. Silverstein maintains that the dehumanizing conditions inside the prison system contributed to the 3 executions he committed. He was held in a specially designed cell in what is called Range 13 at ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. He was the longest held prisoner in solitary confinement within the Bureau of Prisons at the time of his passing. Many prison guards refused to talk to Silverstein out of respect for Klutz. Silverstein was known as the most well-guarded prisoner in the US. Number 3, El Chapo. El Chapo, who is wanted in the United States, has always gotten his way. His appetite for freedom has been described in various psychological reports, and his casual manner of bribing officials is legendary. El Chapo is now under a draconian system with continued surveillance, without any blind spots, dogs, reinforced ground, etc., said Alejandro Hope, former Mexican intelligence agency director. But it is evident that he is going to do all he can to undermine those obstacles. In 2001, Guzman escaped from the Puente Grande prison by hiding inside a laundry cart. 62 prison officials who were paid off were charged for helping him escape. He survived on the run for 8 years, living the life of a rich substance kingpin. Number 2, Robert P. Hansen. Robert P. Hansen was an FBI agent for 25 years, from 1976 to 2001. During that time, he sold thousands of classified documents to Soviet and Russian intelligence, pocketing at least $1.4 million by the time he was caught in 2001. Hansen pled guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 of conspiracy to commit espionage, and was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. Hansen's treason was called possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history by William H. Webster, the chairman of the Commission for the Review of FBI Security Programs. Robert Hansen is currently being held at ADX Florence, where the cells are completely blocked off. Inmates are watched 24/7, and they only get 1 hour out of the cell to work out. At number 1, Michael Swango. Michael Swango was a physician who spent most of the 1980s and 90s using his medical license to poison patients and sometimes colleagues. Despite thoroughly creeping out plenty of people by the time he earned his degree from Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, including being caught faking checkups during OBGYN rotations, Swango secured an internship at what was then known as the Ohio State University Medical Center in 1983. This is where his prolific career as a serial executioner would purportedly begin. It is believed that Swango executed more than 60 people, often by poisoning them with arsenic or intentionally overdosing them with something they were prescribed. Though he could only be charged with 4 executions, Swango was sentenced to life in prison in 2000. He is also spending time at ADX Florence. Talk about a mad doctor, right? Thanks for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and we'll see you next time on Crime Time.